Hi guys, Dr. Robert Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. Now I wanted to discuss the difference between folic acid and folate today. These are of two vitamins and they're designated vitamin B9. They have very similar structures, but they have different they're metabolized in slightly different ways in the body. And there's some interesting science surrounding them, some interesting nutritional science, and therefore I thought they were worthy of discussion. The reason that I've made this video is because I had a comment after one of my other videos, and it was actually a video where I was reviewing the Solgar multivitamins, and the poster suggested that Solgar were wrong to use folic acid in their multivitamins, and claimed that folate would be a better form. And there were some other claims in the comment as well that I don't agree with, but I just wanted to go over the science surrounding the difference between folic acid and folate, because there is quite a lot of misinformation and exaggeration on the internet surrounding this. I have found a very good review paper that I'll put in the comments box below this video, and you can read for yourself the science surrounding this. The paper was published in 2012, so it's quite a recent paper, and it's got a lot of the relevant science in it, and it explains a lot of the interconversions, and there are diagrams in there. So if I'm talking about something and you're not exactly sure and you want a pictorial view of it, that review paper is very good to open and have a look at. There are some good diagrams on there that explain the metabolism. But I'll try and keep this video very simple. I'll just hit the high points so that people can get an overview of the subject, and then they can go away and do further research. So folate is the form of vitamin B9 that we generally get in our diet. Folate is the form of vitamin B9 that is produced in plants. And if we didn't consume fortified foods and we didn't consume multivitamins and other vitamins, folate is all that we would have in our diet. Now, folate is a reduced form of vitamin B9. There is another form, a synthetic form, that is artificially manufactured, that is an oxidized form of the same vitamin. It's structurally very similar, but there are some slight differences. There's an extra carbon group and there's an oxygen group there, which is why it's oxidized, and that is folic acid. Now, folic acid is the form that is used in multivitamins generally, not always, but generally, and folic acid is also added to foods to fortify them, and the reason that folic acid is added to foods is because it was discovered a number of years ago that a folic acid deficiency, or let's call it a folate deficiency really, a vitamin B9 deficiency can cause neural tube defects in the fetus in pregnant women who have a deficiency of vitamin B9. So the idea was to put folic acid in the foods, and therefore that would increase the vitamin B9 intake of the population, and that would decrease the rate of neural tube defects. So this is why we have fortified folic acid fortified foods. Now, the contention is that folate is the preferred form because it's the form that is found in plants. Now, nearly all plants contain folate, but there are some sources that are richer than others. So, for example, green leafy vegetables are particularly rich in folates. Certain cereal grains can be high in folates, and there are certain foods that you can eat to increase your folate intake. But generally, they're present ubiquitously in plants, and we get quite a reasonable intake if we eat a high quality diet. To get folic acid, like I say, you would have to eat fortified foods, which are effectively vitamins thrown into the foods. Breakfast cereals would use folic acid, for example. So if you have B vitamins fortified in your breakfast cereals, the vitamin B9 there will be in the form of folic acid, and most multivitamins will add folic acid as the source of vitamin B9 as well. So that's the difference nutritionally where we get these two forms from. Now, the contention is that folate is a more bioavailable form, and it is more useful in the body. In fact, that's a little bit of a misnomer because it's the only form that's usable in the body. In order for folic acid to be utilised by us, by animals, it has to be first reduced, so the oxygen is removed, and it has to be converted into effectively pass into the folate pool. So folic acid in itself is not used. It has to be first converted into folate before we can use it. Now this is where it starts to get rather complex, and what I find is that internet sites that discuss this tend to oversimplify this. The science is not settled on how this happens, where it happens, or how much it happens. There are two trains of thought, and there are possibly other options as well that haven't been explored. One of the possibilities is that folic acid, some of the folic acid may be converted to folate in the intestinal mucosa. But it's probable that most of the folic acid is converted into folate in the liver. So when we consume multivitamins or vitamins or fortified foods, the folic acid is absorbed. Some of it may be converted to folate in the intestinal mucosa and then passes into the blood, and then it enters the folate pool where it can be metabolically active and incorporated into metabolic pathways. But the vast majority of it will pass to the liver. Now there is an enzyme in the liver called dihydrofolate reductase, which converts the folic acid into dihydrofolate and then tetrahydrofolate. And that tetrahydrofolate then becomes part of this folate pool. Once it's in the tetrahydrofolate form, it's the same as consuming folate in the diet. There's no real difference. The body wouldn't be able to differentiate between the two. As I say, it enters the pool and therefore it is used as folate. So that all seems well and good. The problem is that the liver has a finite capacity to convert folic acid into tetrahydrofolate. So really, there is an upper limit to the amount of folic acid you can consume before you are unable to consume that to convert that folic acid into this active folate pool. So what happens is, if you consume too much folic acid in your diet, some of the folic acid that can't be converted into folate spills out of the liver and into the circulation, and you start to get an increase in the blood levels of folic acid. Now, the contention here is that some people claim that increase in folic acid in the plasma, in the blood, is actually detrimental to the health and could, for example, be a cause of cancer. And the inference here is that the folic acid may in some way interfere with the folate, which is what we really want in the blood. It may interfere with the folate and cause detrimental metabolic problems. Now, there have been studies that have looked at the amount of folic acid you can have in your diet before you get this spillover of the folic acid into the blood. It's generally seen that anything below 200 micrograms a day does not cause an increase in blood levels of folic acid. Above 200 micrograms a day, you do get an increase in the folic acid content of the blood because the dihydrofolate reductase enzyme is saturated. It can't work any quicker. It's converting as much of the folic acid to folate as it can, and therefore some of the folic acid can't be converted, and therefore it spills over into the blood. And it's about 200 micrograms a day where that occurs. When you get to intakes of about 630 micrograms a day, you get quite a large increase in the blood levels of folic acid. However, again, the science on this is not settled because there are vast genetic differences in our ability to convert the folic acid into folate. This can relate to age, it can relate to your general health, it can relate to what else you're eating, and it can also relate to genetic differences in the amount of dihydrofolate reductase enzyme you have in your liver. So it's actively being researched and the question is not known, but those figures are general. Anything below about 200 micrograms of folic acid in the diet, so that would be your multivitamin and your fortified foods. Generally you won't get a spillover of folic acid in the blood. If you consume more than that, you tend to get an increase in folic acid in the blood. If you consume more than about 630 of total folic acid, you're going to start to get large rises in the amount of folic acid you have in your blood. So if we have a look at Solgar's multivitamin, what we find is that the folic acid content of the multivitamin is 400 micrograms, which is obviously above the 200 microgram. This is my VM75. That's above the 200 microgram amount that would cause an increase in folic acid concentrations in the blood. So, what does the science say about having high levels of folic acid in the blood? Well, this is again not settled, it's very contentious. There are studies that look at associations between folic acid and certain diseases, and there are some associations found between folic acid in the blood and certain diseases. There are, for example, there is some evidence that high levels of folic acid in the blood may be associated with certain types, increased risk of certain types of cancer. However, the causal effect of that has not been proven. In other words, there is an association there. So as plasma folic acid levels increase, the risk of cancer increases. But that does not necessarily mean that the folic acid is causing the cancer. For example, it could be that if you have liver damage and you have a decreased capacity to produce dihydrofolate reductase, you would get an increase in your plasma levels of folic acid. Now, that liver damage may be associated with a metabolic disorder that would increase your risk of cancer. And so you can see that just because the folic acid levels increase doesn't mean that they're actually causing the cancer. It could be that the folic acid levels are increasing for the same reason that your risk of cancer is also increasing. So we have to be very careful and distinguish between an association and a causal effect. I've not seen anything in the scientific literature, which that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I've never seen anything that's convinced me that high levels of folic acid are a cause of any particular damaging health effect. There are associations, but they have to be taken in the context, and they have to be taken and read very carefully. And there are limited numbers of studies on this as well. There is also a problem that there are sampling errors as well. One of the other things that can happen is that when you're trying to measure folic acid and folate levels in the blood, you do actually get a conversion of some of the folate into folic acid while you're storing and measuring the blood. So it might be that actually the levels of folic acid that are found in people's in blood in certain circumstances and in certain studies have actually been overestimated. And there were a number of other problems as well with this methodology, which is why science is being very cautious about this link between folic acid and disease. Now, that's the bad side of things. That's the possible negative. There is, a possibility that high levels of folic acid in the blood, when it's in its folic acid form, may have some kind of detrimental effects. But I will stress that they are any effects that have been seen are associations, and they are quite weak associations. There's certainly no strong evidence. The good side is, though, that it has been proven in many studies, and this is a very strong set of pieces of evidence, that if you take folic acid as a supplement, or you fortify your foods with it, you get an increase in folate concentrations in the plasma. That's been assessed. So if you take the synthetic form folic acid, you do get an increase of folate in your plasma. So for those people that have a folate deficiency, taking folic acid will correct that deficiency. That's the first thing to say. The vitamin is effective. The second thing to say is that if you take folic acid, you get a decrease in your plasma levels of homocysteine. Now, the reason for this is that folate is a methyl donor, and it's involved in the pathway that converts methionine to homocysteine. And folate is required in order to prevent the buildup of homocysteine in the cell. It's also other B vitamins are also required in this metabolic pathway, and they're vitamin B6 and vitamin B12. If you have adequate levels of vitamin B12, vitamin B6 and folate, homocysteine levels in the cell decrease because it's able to be converted into other substances. If you have a deficiency of any of those B vitamins, including folate, you will get an increase in homocysteine levels in the cell, and as that homocysteine increases, that homocysteine will then spill out into the plasma, and your blood levels of homocysteine will increase. Now, homocysteine levels in your blood are a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. and they're also being found to be linked to other diseases as well, perhaps even dementia. So high levels of homocysteine are detrimental to your health. And if you can bring those levels down, if they're artificially elevated, you can bring them down. You can actually decrease your risk of those conditions, particularly cardiovascular disease. And one way to do that is to take folic acid. And there have been many studies that have supplemented people with folic acid through foods or through supplements. And the artificial synthetic form, folic acid, is able to bring down homocysteine levels and therefore decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, when we compare the negative effects of folic acid, which are circumstantial associations, quite weak, with this quite strong evidence of the fact that when you take folic acid, you get a distinct and very measurable reduction in homocysteine, which causes actually quite a large reduction in your risk of cardiovascular disease and possibly other diseases like dementia. When we compare the two, I'll let you make up your own mind which would be the better path to go down. Now, there are obviously therefore clear advantages to taking folic acid and having folic acid supplements or fortified foods, a folic acid deficiency, low levels of blood folate are detrimental to your health. But that free folic acid could possibly have some detrimental health effects. So this gets back to two things that I've continually raised. Is firstly, I do think there are too many B vitamins in multivitamin and mineral formulas. I've said this consistently. I don't think you need the levels of B vitamins that are in these formulas, but it's actually quite difficult to get multivitamins that have lower levels. I personally would like to see a reduction in the level of all B vitamins in some of these products. I think they are too high. And the fact is, if you take one of these multivitamins and then when you go to the toilet, your urine does go bright yellow, which is the riboflavin being excreted from your body because it's simply not being used. You've saturated your plasma, you saturated your tissues with riboflavin, and the rest is simply excreted. And the same would be true for many of the other B vitamins as well. So the levels of B vitamins that are in these multivitamins are, I think, too high, and the fact that the folic acid in the Solgar supplement is at 400 micrograms, I would agree with the comment from the poster that that's possibly too high. I would like to see it much reduced. I don't think you need that much if you're eating a high quality diet. You can excuse me, you can quite easily get high levels of folate if you eat a high quality diet. And this comes back also to the fact that, do you need any synthetic folic acid at all? Well, theoretically, if you are eating a high quality diet, I do believe you can get most of the at least the vitamins that you require from your food. There are exceptions. I do think vitamin D supplementation has a place, and I do exclude minerals from that, because minerals they're either there in the soil or they're not. The plants can't synthesize them, and therefore it doesn't matter how high quality your diet is. If they're not present in the soil, you can't get them in your food. But vitamins can be synthesized by plants. As long as you're eating the plants in a reasonably fresh condition, you're eating quite a lot of plant food, and you're eating a high quality diet generally, I do think you can get most of the vitamins you need from your food. And I would say that B vitamins are within that criteria. And whether you need to supplement with extra folic acid, it's obviously a good idea if you're eating a Western diet and you're a female of childbearing age to take a folic acid supplement, or eat fortified foods, because your diet is low quality, and the folic acid that you get in your fortification is better than having a folic acid deficiency. But if you're eating a high quality diet, that might not be the case. So I think really this comes down to what I've always said. This is a case-by-case basis. You have to assess your own diet, and you have to assess your own needs and see what you require. Personally, I would like to see lower levels of B vitamins and including folic acid in multivitamins. I do think they're too high. And I agree with the comments from the poster that certainly it would be nice if Solgar sometimes used higher quality ingredients. I think they do generally try to, and they are one of the companies that does seem to strive to to add the higher quality ingredients, but that does come at a cost, and Solgar vitamins do tend to be more expensive than other brands. And let's not forget that some people who want to take a multivitamin don't have a lot of money, and they can't afford very expensive vitamins. They're doing their best, they struggle for money, and they want to look after their health. And so you've got to take every case and look at it individually. I would suggest that having a look at this paper would be a good start. I'll put I'll put the paper in the comments box below this video, and I would read around the subject and see what is best for yourself. But I would try and stick to academic sites. There are a lot of sites that are trying to sell you something, either a book or a supplement. I'll say it again, I don't sell anything. I don't sell books, I don't sell supplements, and I don't make any money from these videos. So my information comes from what I believe. I'm not trying to sell anything or peddle anything. It's just and I'm not saying the information is always 100% accurate. It's just my opinion a lot of the time. I read the scientific literature, I come to a decision based on what I've read. That doesn't mean that I'm always right. You take my information like you should every other bit of information, and you analyse it yourself, and you do what's best for yourself. But yes, folate is a better form of vitamin B9. Folic acid is an inferior form. But folic acid does have some benefits, and therefore certain people might want to take supplements of folic acid. Certain people might want to take fortified folic acid foods because that suits them and that would actually improve their health. So it's a very contentious issue, and there is no right or wrong answer, so please make up your own decision. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it's been informative in some way. As always, eat well, stay healthy, and protect yourself, and I'll see you soon for another video. Take care.